All right, let's get right into this explainer. Now, I know many of you will look out at your gardens, spot something utterly bizarre growing, and immediately panic. You assume you've done something dreadfully wrong, right? Well, let me assure you, you probably haven't. Today, we're conducting a rather advanced clinical analysis of an anomaly so visually striking it demands our complete and undivided attention. We are looking at plant fasciation.
Let's look at the basic morphology here. Usually, nature builds these standard, healthy, cylindrical stems. That's what we expect. But then, out of nowhere, we get these warped, flattened, ribbon-like shapes. And, most amateur gardeners will see this twisted branch, grab the pruning shears, and just assume their plant is diseased or dying. But what we're actually witnessing isn't a sickness at all. It is a rare, magnificent, biological miracle.
Section 1. Biological glitch. Software malfunction.
Okay, let's dive into this. To really understand the anomaly, we have to define it properly. Fasciation comes from the Latin word fascia, which quite literally means to fuse. It's genuinely one of nature's most striking developmental glitches. Basically, it forces what should be individual cylindrical stems to fuse their identities together into these incredibly broad, spectacular shapes.
Now, what's really interesting about this metaphor is the concept of a broken blueprint. If you think of a plant's DNA instructions as, say, lines of software code telling the cells exactly how to build a precise cylinder, well, in fasciation, we get a biological software code glitch. The code simply breaks, it gets buggy, and instead of printing out a neat, tidy cylinder, the biological machinery accidentally prints out a massive, flattened ribbon.
Section 2. Meristem malfunctions. Decoding the mechanics.
So, the crucial point here is understanding the timeline of this error. Step 1, we start with normal radial growth at the apical meristem. That's just the cluster of rapidly dividing cells right at the growing tip of the plant. But step 2 is where the malfunction kicks in. Instead of growing outward in a circle, radially, the growing tip suddenly elongates into a linear shape. It completely flattens out. And then, step 3, as it continues to grow, that linear tip forces the entire resulting stem to flatten right along with it, into a wide ribbon. And because of this linear elongation, the growth terminates in these incredibly complex, baroque twists and curves. It is a highly dramatic, honestly almost over-the-top architectural distortion. It ends up looking like some bizarre modern art sculpture that really doesn't belong in a standard garden bed. Though frankly, if you ask me, it's far more visually stunning than a normal, boring branch anyway.
Section 3. Triggering mutants. The softwood window.
And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer variety of culprits out there. The causes are actually diverse and surprisingly common. Obviously, it can be a spontaneous genetic mutation, sure, but it can also be triggered by very simple physical stress or injury. A curious insect chewing on the tip, microscopic fungal infections, or even just a late spring frost can shock that apical meristem into malfunctioning.
We also really have to consider the timing, what I like to call the softwood window. You see, these mutations almost exclusively form on rapidly growing softwood rather than older, hardened plant tissue. For instance, amateur gardeners will often severely prune shrubs, like the purple smokebush, trying to force vibrant new leaf color. Unfortunately, that kind of heavy-handed pruning can inadvertently damage that delicate softwood tissue just enough to trigger these massive, flattened spiral growths.
Section 4. Squash twins. Conjoined mutants.
Let's expand our analysis here and see how this glitch builds into the fruit itself. We see this exact phenomenon create what are essentially biological monstrosities, things like squash twins. This is basically conjoined fruit. It happens when a single ovary splits in two during its very early formation phase, fusing the resulting fruit together into a bizarre, conjoined twin. Now, while it's often a completely random accident of the environment, sometimes this glitch becomes hard-coded. We get inherited monsters. This is when it becomes a stabilized genetic trait passed directly through the plant's seeds over generations. The most famous example you'd probably recognize is the coxcomb celosia. That's a flower explicitly prized for its bizarre, fuzzy, brain-like fasciated crests.
Section 5. Plant plasticity. Victorian terology.
Historically speaking, Victorian botanists didn't just throw these weird plants in the compost bin like most people do today. They studied them meticulously under the field of teratology. Now, teratology is literally the study of biological monstrosities. The Victorians used these glaring mistakes to understand plant plasticity, meaning they realized these errors showed just how incredibly flexible and adaptable a plant's biological blueprint actually was when it was put under stress.
Section 6. Reproductive Power-Up. The Oriental Lily.
Okay, here is where I really have to drop the academic detachment for a moment, because what happens next in some species is genuinely remarkable. There is a shocking evolutionary benefit to this mutation. Contrast the standard flower yield with what we call the Oriental Lily power-up. Under normal circumstances, you get a beautiful, predictable cylinder producing a handful of blooms. But when fasciation hits the Oriental Lily, that single, flattened, ribbon-like stem has massively increased surface area. Because of that extra real estate on the glitching, linear meristem, it creates a massive, temporary reproductive boost. The plant just explodes, producing an unusually, almost impossibly high number of flowers from a single stalk.
To see a mistake in the code, a literal environmental accident caused by a passing bug or a cold breeze, transform a plant from a simple stem into an explosive, chaotic factory of massive floral reproduction. I mean, you look at the sheer scale of what this biological error accomplishes out of nowhere. Now that's absolutely wild. It really leaves you wondering, doesn't it? If a simple glitch can create such an incredible reproductive advantage, what other mistakes is nature making right now that will define the forests of tomorrow?